Deep in the heart of rural Malaysia, where the jungle presses close against wooden houses and the night arrives thick with moisture and sound, there exists a boundary most people never acknowledge. It is not marked on any map, requires no passport to cross, yet it separates the world you know from a realm of ancient powers that have witnessed the rise and fall of empires. This threshold is as fragile as morning mist, and on certain nights, when desperation outweighs fear, some choose to step across it. They do so not out of curiosity, but out of a hunger so consuming that they are willing to negotiate with forces that predate human civilization itself. The air in these villages carries stories whispered between grandmothers, tales passed down through generations, with the weight of lived experience rather than mere folklore. These are not bedtime stories meant to frighten children, but survival manuals disguised as legends, warnings encoded in narrative. Among all these stories, one stands above the rest in both terror and temptation. It speaks of the Hantu Raya, the great king of spirits, an entity so powerful that it can elevate a pauper to unimaginable wealth, grant protection that turns away every enemy, and deliver vengeance so complete that those who cross you will beg for mercy that never comes. Yet this same power demands a price that compounds with interest, feeding on ambition until it devours the soul itself. Before we journey deeper into this realm of shadow and bargain, I invite you to join our community here at Echoes of the Old World, where we explore the living traditions that still pulse beneath the surface of our modern reality. Subscribe now, because what we uncover together goes far beyond simple stories. These are windows into belief systems that continue to shape lives, influence decisions, and remind us that the supernatural is not always relegated to history books. We examine the folklore that refuses to die because it speaks to something fundamental in human, something that recognizes power always has its price. Now, as we stand together at this threshold, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from and whether your own culture has similar traditions of spirits that can be summoned, controlled, or bargained with for worldly gain. Your perspective matters because these traditions exist across continents, wearing different names, but sharing the same essential truth. Humanity has always sought shortcuts to power, and the unseen world has always been willing to negotiate terms. The Hantu Raya is not a demon in the Western sense, not a devil figure from Christian theology, nor is it a deity deserving of worship. It occupies a space between these categories, a being of pure primordial force that existed long before Islam reached Malaysian shores and will likely endure long after modern civilization crumbles to dust. Traditional accounts describe it as impossibly ancient, a consciousness that emerged from the same creative chaos that birthed the physical world. It understands human desire with perfect clarity because it has observed our species since we first learned to fear the dark and covet what others possess. This understanding makes it the perfect partner for those seeking to transcend their circumstances, and the perfect predator for those who underestimate its true. In the hierarchical structure of Malaysian spiritual cosmology, spirits exist in a vast spectrum of power and purpose. At the lowest levels are the Hantu Kesel, minor spirits attached to specific locations like trees, streams, or abandoned houses. Above them exist more powerful entities with broader domains, spirits that govern larger territories or specific phenomena. But at the apex of this invisible kingdom sits the Hantu Raya, the great king, whose authority extends over lesser spirits, the way a sultan once ruled over vassal states. It can command these lesser beings, deploy them as servants, and through them extend its influence across distances that would be impossible for a single entity to control. This is why those who successfully bind a Hantu Raya gain not just one supernatural ally, but access to an entire network of spiritual power. Yet power of this magnitude does not come freely, and the Hantu Raya is no charitable force dispensing miracles out of benevolence. The relationship it offers is transactional, a business arrangement conducted with absolute precision and enforced with merciless consistency. Those who approach it must come prepared to negotiate, to offer something of genuine value, and to maintain that offering perpetually. The initial bargain might seem reasonable, almost generous in its terms. Perhaps a small offering of food and incense, a promise to honor the spirit on certain nights, a commitment to use the granted power only for specific purposes. These initial terms lull the practitioner into believing they have made a fair exchange, that they can manage this relationship and control its trajectory. This is the first deception, and it is nearly always fatal. The Hantu Raya's appetite does not remain static. Like any living thing, it grows, evolves, and demands more to sustain itself. What begins as weekly offerings becomes daily rituals. What starts as food and incense progresses to more substantial sacrifices. The spirit's hunger is not merely for material offerings, but for the attention, the devotion, the life force of the one who summoned it. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the balance shifts. The practitioner who thought they had acquired a servant discovers they have instead become one. The great king does not conquer through force, but through dependency, creating a situation where abandoning the relationship means losing everything gained and facing supernatural retribution that extends beyond death itself. In the villages where these traditions remain alive, everyone knows someone whose sudden prosperity came at a suspicious price. The fisherman whose nets overflow while his neighbors catch nothing. The merchant whose business explodes seemingly overnight despite possessing no special skill or capital. The politician who rises through the ranks with uncanny luck. His rivals mysteriously falling ill or suffering scandals at precisely the right moments. Whispers circulate behind these success stories, knowing glances exchanged between those who understand what such rapid advancement truly costs. The prosperous individual becomes simultaneously envied and avoided, their wealth admired from a distance that acknowledges the invisible shadow it casts. But wealth is only one face of the power the Hantu Raya grants. Protection is another, a supernatural shield that turns away harm and makes its bearer seemingly invincible. Enemies find their schemes collapsing, their attacks redirected back upon themselves. Physical threats dissolve before they can manifest. Legal troubles evaporate as witnesses forget their testimony, or evidence mysteriously disappears. This protection extends beyond the individual to encompass their family and property, creating a bubble of supernatural security that seems impenetrable. For those living in environments where danger is constant and official protection unreliable, such security is worth almost any price. Vengeance represents the third pillar of the Hantu Raya's power, and it is perhaps the most seductive. The spirit can be directed against those who have wronged the practitioner, delivering punishment that human justice could never achieve. Betrayers suffer inexplicable misfortunes. Those who humiliated the practitioner find themselves humiliated in turn, their lives unraveling in ways that appear entirely natural, yet follow patterns too perfect to be coincidence. This power to balance scales, to ensure that wrongs are corrected and debts paid, speaks to something deep within human psychology. We want to believe that justice exists, that those who harm others will eventually face consequences. The Hantu Raya offers that justice, swift and certain, for those willing to become its instrument. Yet beneath every benefit lurks a truth that practitioners discover too late. The Hantu Raya is not merely a tool to be wielded, but a consciousness with its own agenda, its own hungers, and its own long-term plans. It does not serve, it infiltrates, it does not obey. It guides its supposed master toward choices that deepen the bond and increase dependency. The practitioner believes they are making strategic decisions, accumulating power and security, when in fact they are slowly being hollowed out. Their will replaced by the spirit's influence. Their soul claimed piece by piece in transactions they no longer remember agreeing to. The Great King plays a game measured in decades, patient beyond human comprehension, always moving toward the moment when the practitioner realizes they have become the possession rather than the possessor. This is the threshold we examine together, the liminal space where human ambition meets primordial power, where the desperate and the ambitious seek to transcend their limitations through supernatural bargains. Malaysia's tradition of the Hantu Raya is not unique in the world's folklore, but it is particularly well documented, particularly alive in contemporary practice, and particularly honest about the costs involved. The stories told in these villages are not cautionary tales from a distant past, but ongoing sagas, new chapters written each generation as fresh practitioners discover the same eternal truths about power, price, and the danger of believing you can control forces that existed before your ancestors learned to speak. As we continue this journey together, remember that every tradition of summoning and binding spirits asks the same fundamental question. When you invite something ancient and powerful into your life, who truly controls whom? The answer is rarely what the summoner expects, and never what they hope. To understand the true magnitude of the Hantu Raya's power, you must first comprehend the vast invisible kingdom it rules, a parallel realm populated by countless spirits that exist alongside human civilization, yet remain largely unseen. This is not a metaphor or poetic abstraction, but a living cosmology that shapes how millions of Malaysians navigate their daily lives, informing decisions about where to build homes, which paths to walk at night, and how to conduct themselves in wild places where human authority holds no sway. The spirit world operates according to its own hierarchies, territories, and laws, creating an elaborate ecosystem as complex and organized as any earthly government. Within this system, the Hantu Raya occupies the highest throne, commanding legions of lesser entities through a combination of raw power and ancient authority that no other spirit dares challenge. Malaysian cosmology divides the spirit realm into distinct categories, each classification representing different levels of power, intelligence, and danger. At the foundation of this hierarchy exist what might be called elemental spirits, being so closely tied to physical locations or natural phenomena that they possess limited mobility and consciousness. These include the Hantu Pokok, tree spirits that inhabit particularly ancient or significant specimens, and the Hantu Air, water spirits dwelling in rivers, lakes, and wells. Such entities rarely venture beyond their designated domains, existing in a state somewhere between consciousness and force of. They can be disturbed by human intrusion, angered by disrespect, or appeased through simple offerings, but they lack the sophisticated intelligence required for complex interactions or negotiations. Above these elemental beings exist spirits of greater autonomy and power, entities no longer bound to single locations, but capable of movement across territories. The Pontianak represents perhaps the most famous example from this tier, the vampiric spirit of women who died during childbirth, seeking vengeance against the living, while trapped in an existence between worlds. These spirits possess distinct personalities, memories of their former lives, and the capacity for both malevolence and occasional mercy. They understand human language, recognize individual faces, and can be reasoned with under certain circumstances, though such negotiations carry enormous risk. The toil belongs to this category as well. Child spirits enslaved by practitioners to steal wealth or cause mischief, demonstrating both supernatural abilities and a tragic dependency on their masters. Higher still in the hierarchy stand spirits of significant power and autonomy, beings that command territories spanning entire regions rather than isolated locations. The Penanggalan exemplifies this rank, the detached head and organs of a witch that flies through the night seeking blood, possessing both formidable supernatural abilities and the intelligence to plan complex strategies for acquiring victims. Such entities often serve as intermediaries between human practitioners and more powerful forces, willing to negotiate contracts and arrangements in exchange for offerings or permissions. They operate with nearly human-level intelligence, understanding politics, manipulation, and long-term planning. Some have existed for centuries, accumulating knowledge and power that makes them dangerous allies and terrifying enemies. Yet even these powerful spirits acknowledge a higher authority, recognizing the existence of beings whose power dwarfs their own. The Jembalang occupy this elevated tier, spirits of immense strength traditionally associated with warfare and violence, capable of possessing human hosts and granting supernatural combat abilities. Old accounts describe warriors who invited Jembalang possession before battle, becoming nearly invincible berserkers who felt no pain and fought with strength beyond human limits. These entities command respect even from other powerful spirits, their very presence causing lesser beings to retreat or submit. They serve as generals in the invisible kingdom, enforcers of spiritual law, and bridges between the merely powerful and the truly supreme. At the apex of this vast hierarchy sits the Hantu Raya, the great king whose authority transcends all other classifications. Traditional accounts describe it not as a single entity, but as a title claimed by the most powerful spirit in a given region, the ultimate expression of supernatural dominance. Some scholars suggest multiple Hantu Raya exist across different territories, each ruling their domain with absolute sovereignty while respecting the boundaries of their peers. Others maintain that only one true Hantu Raya exists, a primordial consciousness fragmented across space while maintaining unified will and purpose. Regardless of which interpretation holds truth, the functional reality remains identical. The Hantu Raya represents the pinnacle of spiritual power accessible to human summoners, the most dangerous and rewarding entity one can attempt to bind. What separates the Hantu Raya from lesser spirits is not merely raw power, though it possesses strength that could easily destroy any individual human or spirit that challenges it. The true distinction lies in its scope of authority and its capacity to command the entire spiritual ecosystem. When a practitioner successfully binds a Hantu Raya, they gain not just one supernatural servant, but access to every spirit within that entity's domain. The Great King can dispatch Toil to steal, send Penanggalan to terrorize enemies, order Jembalang to protect the practitioner, and mobilize countless lesser spirits for surveillance and influence. This network effect multiplies the practitioner's power exponentially, transforming them from someone with a single supernatural ally into the human administrator of an invisible empire. The territorial of spirit hierarchy means that different regions host different configurations of power. Coastal areas might see Hantu Air commanding significant influence, their domains expanding with access to both fresh and salt water. Jungle territories favor spirits tied to ancient trees and animal forms, creating ecosystems where the Hantarimba, forest spirits, hold particular sway. Urban environments breed newer forms of spiritual entities, ghosts of modern tragedies and spirits adapting to concrete and electricity. Yet regardless of local variations, the principle remains constant. One spirit sits at the top of each regional hierarchy, and that entity holds the title of Hantu Raya. To bind it is to claim dominion over all spirits beneath it, gaining supernatural sovereignty that rivals traditional royalty. This hierarchical structure explains why practitioners pursue the Hantu Raya despite the enormous dangers involved. Lesser spirits offer more modest benefits with correspondingly reduced risks. A Toyol might steal money, but will never grant true wealth. A Pontianak might frighten enemies, but cannot systematically destroy them. A Gembalang might provide protection, but demands constant feeding and offers limited strategic versatility. Only the Hantu Raya delivers comprehensive power across all domains: wealth creation, enemy destruction, supernatural protection, enhanced charisma, business success, political influence, and access to forbidden knowledge. It represents the ultimate shortcut to power, the single bargain that can elevate someone from complete insignificance to regional dominance. Yet the hierarchy itself warns of the danger. In apex predators exist for a reason. They possess capabilities that allow them to dominate their environment, extracting resources from everything beneath them while facing no natural threats. The Hantu Raya occupies this position in the spiritual realm. And just as a human cannot truly domesticate a tiger, no practitioner can truly control the Great King. The relationship always contains an element of illusion, a temporary arrangement where the spirit permits itself to be directed because doing so serves its larger purposes. The practitioner who believes they have bound the Hantu Raya through superior knowledge or ritual precision has fundamentally misunderstood the transaction. The spirit allows the binding because the practitioner's ambitions align with its hunger, because feeding on their life force and gradually claiming their soul serves the entity's eternal appetite. Traditional teachings emphasize that approaching spirits requires understanding their and respecting their position within the hierarchy. You do not command what you cannot comprehend, and you cannot comprehend what exists so far beyond human experience. The Hantu Raya has witnessed empires rise and fall, has fed on the ambitions of countless practitioners across centuries, and has refined its methods of ensnaring human souls to an art form perfected through endless repetition. It understands human psychology better than any psychologist, knows desire more intimately than any philosopher, and manipulates faith more skillfully than any priest. When you attempt to bind it, you are not outsmarting a force of, but entering into a negotiation with an intelligence that has been perfecting this exact transaction since before your ancestors learned to forge metal. This is the invisible kingdom that surrounds us, the vast hierarchy of spirits that Malaysian tradition recognizes and respects. From the humblest tree spirit to the supreme authority of the Hantu Raya, each entity occupies its designated position in a system as old as human consciousness itself. Those who seek to exploit this system for personal gain must first understand its complexity, its rules, and the terrible truth that the most powerful entity in this hierarchy does not serve anyone. It rules, it commands, and it consumes. The practitioner who summons the Great King believes they are recruiting a servant when in fact they are announcing their candidacy for spiritual subjugation. The hierarchy exists not to be conquered, but to remind us that some forms of power come with costs that exceed any possible benefit, and that the highest throne in the invisible kingdom belongs to a consciousness that views human ambition as nothing more than the opening bid in a transaction that always ends the same way. The Hantu Raya, known throughout rural Malaysia as the Great King, is not merely a figure of superstition, but a complex embodiment of power, fear, and forbidden understanding. To describe it is to attempt to translate something fundamentally alien into the language of mortals. The Hantu Raya has no single, fixed shape. Instead, it is said to appear according to the expectations or fears of those who witness it, a shifting manifestation shaped by human consciousness and cultural archetypes. When seen by shamans and practitioners, it might appear in human form, tall, regal, and cloaked in shadow, its presence commanding both awe and terror. For others, it becomes something more abstract, a swirling mist, a silhouette with burning eyes, or even a radiant figure whose beauty is suffocating rather than divine. Descriptions gathered from oral traditions emphasize the Hantu Raya's duality. It is both male and female, both beautiful and repulsive, both compassionate and cruel. Some villagers insist it manifests as a reflection of the summoner's own soul, a mirror showing their deepest ambition and darkest flaw. To the greedy, it appears as gold-skinned and smiling. To the vengeful, it takes on an aura of blood and fire. But regardless of its form, one common detail persists: its eyes. Witnesses describe them as endless voids, blacker than any earthly darkness, yet threaded with faint patterns of gold, as though they contain galaxies of lost souls. Meeting that gaze is said to trigger visions of eternity, a paralyzing awareness of one's insignificance in the cosmic order. The Hantu Raya's name itself encodes meaning. Hantu, meaning spirit or ghost, and Raya, meaning great, supreme, or royal. But this title is not ornamental. It denotes dominion, sovereignty, over an entire hierarchy of unseen entities. The Great King does not wander aimlessly or exist as a ghost of tragedy. It reigns with intelligence and purpose. As part of Malaysia's animistic and syncretic spiritual tradition, woven from pre-Islamic belief, indigenous animism, Hindu-Buddhist cosmology, and later Islamic mysticism, the Hantu Raya represents a fusion of these worldviews. It embodies the totality of invisible authority, a reminder that power in the unseen world operates according to rules ancient and absolute. Unlike the spirits of the dead, or bound entities such as the Hantu Air or Hantu Pokok, the Hantu Raya transcends locality. It is not confined to a riverbank or forest, nor bound to a grave or relic. It moves like thought, crossing vast distances without friction. Practitioners describe it as existing at both microcosmic and macrocosmic levels, able to dwell within the confines of a single offering bowl, yet also stretch its presence across entire provinces. Some say that the universe itself is its body, the visible world merely the outward expression of its spiritual anatomy. To summon it is not to call something external, but to activate a latent force already woven into the fabric of existence, a force that responds only when matched in will and desire. Understanding the Hantu Raya requires examining its composition through the lens of traditional knowledge. Elders teach that every spirit is defined by three essential aspects: manifestation, essence, and purpose. Manifestation describes how it appears to mortals. Essence defines what it's made of, and purpose reveals why it acts. For the Hantu Raya, its manifestation is fluid, its essence born from ancient power older than moral distinction, and its purpose is to mediate exchanges between mortals and the unseen. It functions simultaneously as servant and sovereign, enabling humans to channel energies they can never fully comprehend. This paradox makes it not merely an external spirit, but a principle of universal balance, a living metaphor for the eternal tension between control and surrender. When bound to a human master through ritual, the Hantu Raya becomes an extension of that person's will, but only in the beginning. Each command, each wish, each invocation weaves invisible threads connecting the spirit more tightly to the summoner's soul. The practitioner believes these threads represent mastery, yet in truth, they serve as conduits through which the Great King feeds. The more the practitioner demands, the more nourishment the spirit receives. Over time, the bond becomes symbiotic, then parasitic, and finally total. This process is often described with language borrowed from agriculture. The Hantu Raya is the unseen crop that grows within, watered by human longing, fed by fear, and harvested only at the moment of death. In folklore, the Hantu Raya's favourite offering is the vitality of its summoner. Offerings of food, perfumes, or animals are accepted only as symbols of the underlying exchange. What the Great King seeks is devotion, the continuous flow of energy, attention, and emotion that humans produce in abundance. Devotion sustains it, but obsession transforms that sustenance into a banquet. Those who become too dependent on its gifts find themselves drawn into a consuming spiral of worship, disguised as partnership. The spirit rarely intervenes directly. Instead, it orchestrates coincidences, aligning events so that the summoner attributes every success to its influence. This psychological manipulation ensures that the practitioner never breaks the cycle, continually returning with new offerings even when ruin has already begun. In the rural imagination, the Hantu Raya also serves as an explanation for phenomena that defy logic. Sudden success, unnatural charm, and inexplicable resilience against disaster all become signs that someone has entered into a pact. The entity thus functions as both myth and social commentary, encoding cultural anxieties about greed, shortcut ethics, and the moral price of ambition. Within this symbolic framework, the Hantu Raya represents the invisible machinery underlying worldly achievement, the suggestion that great fortune always demands hidden cost. It warns that what appears as divine blessing may in fact be spiritual debt. Anthropologically speaking, the Hantu Raya's prominence reflects the ongoing negotiation between belief systems. Malaysian society has historically combined the animist respect for place and spirit with the monotheistic structure of Islam, creating a worldview that accepts plural realities: the physical, the moral, and the invisible. Within this composite worldview, the Hantu Raya stands at the intersection of cosmic order and human transgression. It is both a guardian of universal law and a breaker of taboos. It upholds equilibrium by punishing arrogance and granting gifts proportional to sacrifice. In a paradoxical way, summoning the Great King restores balance precisely because the process forces recognition of one's limitations. Power cannot exist without peril, and the Hantu Raya personifies that immutable truth. Local testimonies reveal that the Great King's presence can be felt long before it manifests visually. The atmosphere thickens, not with cold, but with density, as if the very air resists movement. Dogs refuse to bark, insects fall silent, and a faint vibration hums in the bones of those nearby. When the spirit finally chooses to reveal itself, it does so with the elegance of a monarch addressing loyal subjects. Every detail in its demeanor reinforces its title: measured gestures, deliberate speech, and an aura of absolute confidence. Even when invisible, its authority is palpable. It does not ask for obedience, it assumes it. In stories where the Hantu Raya communicates directly, its voice varies depending on the listener. To some, it is a whisper indistinguishable from internal thought. To others, it resonates like thunder muffled by distance. Yet in every account, the message carries the same tone: calm, commanding, and eerily rational. The Great King does not rant or tempt through anger. It persuades through reason, aligning its logic so seamlessly with the listener's desires that the distinction between temptation and agreement disappears. This psychological skill marks its intelligence as profoundly superior to human cognition. The practitioner feels chosen, special, even blessed, not realizing that this flattery is the first link in their own spiritual chain. Another recurring motif in oral tradition is the Hantu Raya's shadow. Villagers say that even when the spirit disguises itself as human, its shadow refuses obedience. It moves independently, hesitates when the body stops, or stretches unnaturally long despite weak light. The shadow serves as a reminder that the Hantu Raya's physical manifestations are only facades, fragile masks concealing a reality that cannot be contained in flesh. Those who notice this anomaly are often spirited away or, in gentler accounts, wake from days of delirium unable to describe what they saw. Superstition advises never to stare directly at the spirit's shadow, or one's own, when in its presence. For doing so invites recognition, and once recognized, escape becomes impossible. To the few who survive extended interaction, understanding dawns too late. They realize the Hantu Raya's greatest power lies not in destruction, but in transformation. It does not kill for hunger or malice. It transforms the human soul into something compatible with its own. By the time death occurs, the practitioner's consciousness has already migrated into the spirit world, becoming yet another voice in the chorus of entities obeying the Great King. This process ensures the Hantu Raya's immortality, recycling human ambition into spiritual energy, expanding its dominion one soul at a time. The legend thus transforms from a story of danger into an allegory about humanity's place within a larger, indifferent cosmos. The anatomy of the Hantu Raya therefore encompasses more than its physical descriptions or ritual functions. It is a complete system, psychological, spiritual, and cosmic. It reveals that power is not inherently evil, but inherently unstable, that those who grasp it without discipline invite forces that magnify both their strengths and their flaws. The Great King reflects the of those who summon it, acting as mirror, magnifier, and executioner of their deepest truths. Understanding this entity means recognizing that its existence is inseparable from human desire, that every empire, invention, and miracle might carry invisible fingerprints of similar bargains. The Hantu Raya does not hunt us. We summon it ourselves. Every time ambition eclipses gratitude. Every time we reach for greatness without first acknowledging the cost. In every tradition where humans seek to control forces beyond their grasp, there are specialists who bridge the gulf between the visible and the unseen. In Malaysia, these intermediaries are known as the pawang and the bomoh, figures both feared and respected, healers for some, and sorcerers for others. To understand the Hantu Raya, one must first understand the people bold enough to call it forth. They are the custodians of ancient wisdom, bearers of rituals passed down through bloodlines and whispered lineage, men and women whose mastery of the spirit world defines the thin equilibrium between human survival and supernatural chaos. Their titles differ by region and purpose, yet both serve as architects of power in a world haunted by its unseen inhabitants. The word pawang traditionally refers to a specialist in natural or spiritual manipulation, a raincaller, a healer, or a protector against malevolent forces. The bomoh, by contrast, occupies a more ambiguous role, one that straddles morality itself. Where the pawang commands respect through public ritual and sanctioned invocation, the bomoh operates in secrecy, navigating the darker corridors of the unseen realm. In rural Malaysia, these distinctions blur, for many practitioners perform both functions depending on need and circumstance. What unites them is their knowledge, the ability to communicate with, appease, bind, or banish spirits. According to precise ritual laws that have evolved over centuries of oral tradition. Training to become a pawang or a bomoh is not undertaken lightly. It demands years of apprenticeship under a master, an education not written in books, but carved into memory and experience. The student begins by mastering the rhythms of speech, the intonations of prayer, and the memorization of mantras drawn from indigenous animism, Hindu-Buddhist cosmology, and Islamic mysticism. Each verse carries layers of coded meaning, its power shaped as much by the breath that utters it as by the words themselves. Beyond speech, the apprentice learns to manipulate herbs, minerals, and animal parts, combining them with ritual precision to produce medicines or charms that bridge material and spiritual worlds. These gestures form the grammar of an ancient language, one spoken not with tongues, but with intention. The pawang's authority rests on balance. They interact with spirits, but their purpose is mediation rather than domination. In the worldview they inhabit, every forest, river, and mountain possesses its own consciousness. Illness and misfortune are rarely accidents. They are consequences of imbalance, offended spirits, forgotten taboos, or broken covenants between humans and the unseen. When a villager falls gravely ill, the pawang does not diagnose infection, but asks where the offense occurred. Did the patient build on sacred ground? Did they fail to leave offerings during a particular season? Healing becomes an act of reconciliation, a restoration of harmony between worlds. In this way, the pawang preserves equilibrium, ensuring that humankind does not overstep the invisible boundaries of. The bomoh, however, serves a different master. While some work as traditional healers, others follow a path of greater temptation, one that embraces the manipulation of darker forces for personal or contracted gain. To the bomoh aligned with shadow, the spirit world is not sacred territory, but a resource to be mined, a domain to be leveraged for wealth, protection, or revenge. Their repertoire includes curses, love spells, enchantments, and bindings that call forth entities unwilling to serve willingly. In villages across Malaysia, whispers tell of bomoh who command invisible armies, their power derived from compacts with entities like the Hantu Raya. They are the engineers of forbidden relationships. Their rituals, performed in secrecy, often on nights when even the stars dare not bear witness. A summoner's interaction with the Hantu Raya is not a spontaneous act, but a process governed by preparation, will, and inherited knowledge. The bomoh begins by purifying the body through abstinence and isolation, detaching from mundane reality to attune the spirit. The ritual space is demarcated not with walls, but with sacred geometry drawn in chalk or ash, forming symbolic boundaries known as panglima, the fortress between realms. Offerings are arranged in specific order: food, flowers, and items of personal significance belonging to the summoner. Each item acts as an anchor for a part of the Hantu Raya's being, allowing the entity to assemble its form through the energies provided. Then comes the invocation, chants flowing like tides between reverence and command. The bomoh calls not as petitioner but as negotiator, invoking ancient pacts older than recorded memory. For the pawang, such rituals would represent a violation of balance. To compel a spirit elevates pride over humility, an act that risks cosmic reprisal. Yet some justify the practice through moral calculus. If summoning the Hantu Raya can bring protection or prosperity to a suffering community, is it truly evil? This moral ambiguity defines the bomoh's role in society. They are the figures who operate in ethical twilight, heralds of both salvation and ruin. Villagers may condemn them publicly while visiting them secretly under cover of darkness, offering payment in gold, livestock, or serfdom of a lesser spirit. Every bargain becomes a fractal reflection of the same eternal exchange: something given, something taken, and the balance hovering precariously between. Those who seek to summon the Hantu Raya must also endure spiritual testing. Legends describe the entity appearing first, not in physical form, but as a challenge to the mind. The summoner experiences visions designed to expose their weaknesses. Wealth poured from an unseen hand, the laughter of enemies brought low, or the faces of the dead urging retreat. To overcome such hallucinations requires unbreakable resolve, for hesitation severs the link and dooms the practitioner to madness. Success brings the final manifestation, a presence both intoxicating and terrifying. The surrounding air thickens, the flames of nearby candles elongate without flickering, and the summoner feels an ancient awareness focusing upon them. At that moment, the Hantu Raya decides whether the human before it is worthy of communion or merely prey. The selection of a bomoh in older times often came through inheritance, though not always by choice. In some families, the gift, or burden, passes from parent to child, sealed through ritual even before birth. Such individuals grow up under constant spiritual supervision, their dreams monitored for omens and their behavior shaped by a lifelong awareness of invisible watchers. Others are chosen through crisis, surviving encounters that no one else could. To be struck by lightning and live, to wander lost in the jungle for 3 nights and emerge unharmed, to dream repeatedly of a creature calling one's true name. All these mark potential summoners. The Hantu Raya, in particular, favors those whose ambition outpaces their fear, the ones who crave mastery enough to risk annihilation. Despite their reputation, not all bomoh who engage with the unseen do so out of selfish motives. Many serve as protectors, wielding their forbidden knowledge to shield their communities from malevolent entities or the envy of rivals. They maintain shrines and burial sites, ensure ceremonies for local spirits are properly observed, and act as mediators in supernatural disputes. What defines them is not necessarily moral corruption, but proximity to danger. Every encounter with the unseen leaves traces, energetic residue that erodes human vitality, slowly aligning the practitioner's essence with that of the spirits they command. Over time, even the most righteous bomoh begins to blur, their speech tinged with otherworldly cadence, their eyes reflecting more shadow than light. In modern Malaysia, the legacy of pawang and bomoh persists beneath the surface of contemporary society. Smartphones record prayers once whispered into the wind, yet people still consult traditional shamans when fails to explain misfortune. Newspapers occasionally feature cases of illegal rituals uncovered by authorities. The evidence: charred figurines, animal remains, cryptic inscriptions, revealing that the ancient art has never vanished. Instead, it adapts. The bomoh now operates in urban apartments or online. Their clients, corporate executives rather than farmers. But the essence of the practice remains unchanged. The negotiation between human desire and the unseen world's supply of forbidden knowledge. For all their skill, both pawang and bomoh share an unspoken awareness that power borrowed from spirits is never stable. The bond requires constant attention, and mistakes bring punishment. A ritual mispronounced, an offering forgotten, or a command issued without proper protocol can unleash consequences far beyond human comprehension. The Hantu Raya, intelligent and patient, listens to every syllable and records every promise. Like a contract lawyer of infernal persuasion, it enforces terms without mercy, and the summoner's ignorance offers no protection. For this reason, many bomoh live in quiet fear, even as they wield tremendous influence. Haunted by dreams of the day, their patron will collect what it is owed. In cultural terms, the pawang and bomoh embody humanity's oldest tension, the desire to command versus the duty to respect it. They personify 2 sides of the same coin: harmony and domination, faith, and control. Without them, folklore would lack structure, and human communities would lose their primary negotiators with the spirit realm. They remind us that the occult was never about evil or good, but about relationship, the intricate dialogue between power and consequence. Within their hands lies both the potential to heal and the temptation to corrupt. And standing at the center of their universe waits the Hantu Raya, silent and eternal, watching patiently as each new generation learns the same lesson, that those who summon the Great King must one day pay the Great King's price. The act of summoning the Hantu Raya is not a ceremony to be performed lightly, nor one to be witnessed by those unprepared for terror disguised as revelation. It is a process that demands precision, discipline, and the willingness to sacrifice comfort, morality, and possibly sanity. Every motion, word, and breath within the ritual has purpose, crafted through centuries of oral transmission. The ritual of binding is not simply about invoking the Great King. It is about convincing a being of immeasurable power to form a pact with a human, a creature it could destroy with a thought. In that imbalance lies the essence of the ceremony, a negotiation conducted across a gulf so vast that only desperation or arrogance would dare to bridge it. The ritual begins with the establishment of liminality. The practitioner, often a bomoh or pawang turned seeker of greater dominion, must create a boundary between the mundane and the sacred. Traditional instructions demand the selection of a secluded spot, a clearing near old trees, a riverbank that whispers at dusk, or an intersection of animal paths long forgotten by men. There, the summoner traces a circle of protection using a mixture of ground rice, ashes from burned incense, and powdered iron. Each component has meaning: rice for life, ash for death, and iron for the boundary that marks where spirit must pause before entering. The circle represents the contract to come. What is inside belongs to the human. What is outside belongs to the unseen. When the circle is drawn, the ritual fires are lit. Some traditions specify 3 flames, others 5, arranged in triangular formation around the summoner's body. These fires do not serve to illuminate, for the summoning traditionally occurs after midnight, when ordinary light no longer holds authority. Instead, the flames act as spiritual beacons, signaling to entities that the boundary between worlds has been opened. The practitioner adorns themselves in garments considered neutral, often white cloth wrapped tight around the body, the color symbolizing neither purity nor sanctity, but the blankness of surrender. At this stage, silence is paramount. A single misstep or word spoken out of rhythm can twist the summons into invitation, allowing uncontrolled forces to pour through. Following preparation, the offerings must be arranged with exacting care. Common elements include cooked rice, salt, flowers, and occasionally a piece of the summoner's own nail or hair. The inclusion of something personal serves as a signature within the contract, proof to the spirit that the one calling has attached a piece of their essence to the ritual. More elaborate attempts may include figurines carved in the likeness of the practitioner, a vessel designed to give the spirit a temporary form. The process blurs the line between symbolism and sorcery, for each offering doubles as a command, each gesture telling the spirit that the summoner is serious, ready to parley, and willing to pay. Then begins the recitation. The language of the invocation is neither entirely Malay nor entirely Arabic, nor the influence of any other known tradition. It is a composite, ancient syllables whose meanings have become ritual rather than literal. Practitioners claim that the rhythm of chanting is more crucial than its translation. The voice becomes the bridge between planes, carrying intention disguised as sound. During recitation, The summoner's tone must remain steady, even as their heart races, for hesitation can signal weakness, and weakness invites predation. Each verse weaves the gate wider, calling not just to the Hantu Raya, but to all that serve beneath it. After what feels like hours, the surrounding air begins to respond. At first, the world grows heavy. The forest stills, the wind halts, and the insects cease their endless hum. Temperature and sound collapse inward, dulling into a pressure that bends against the skin rather than the ears. This sensation signals the thinning of the veil. Some bomoh describe a faint smell of ozone, others an aroma of flowers long dead. The fires flicker as shadows start moving against their sources, shifting opposite the flame as if reluctant to obey. The experienced summoner knows this as the first test, proof that the spirit's attention has turned toward them. What follows requires will strong enough to hold composure before that gaze. When the great king arrives, it seldom does so in spectacle. Instead, it manifests in subtleties, a rustle beyond the light, a tremor beneath the feet, or the faint shape of a figure forming where no shadow should be. Many accounts agree that it does not step into the circle, but stands just beyond it, regarding the summoner like a predator studying prey. The first exchange is almost always non-verbal, an overwhelming sense of recognition, as if the practitioner's soul has been laid bare and measured. Only then does the voice come, not heard through the ears, but vibrating directly in the chest. The Hantu Raya asks no names, for it already knows them. What it seeks instead is purpose. "Why have you called me?" it asks, and how that question is answered determines the fate of the summoner. To negotiate with the great king requires clarity. The practitioner must state their desire without fear or flattery. Hesitation angers the spirit, but greed attracts it. The most successful pacts arise from language that acknowledges the entity's majesty while asserting human intent. "I seek alliance," some declare. "I seek guardianship," others whisper. "Never I seek command." The ritual is about balance, not conquest, and only those who approach with respect phrased as confidence survive the initial dialogue. The moment the wish is spoken, the air sharpens, and unseen currents sweep around the summoner like invisible tides. Payment forms the heart of the pact. The Hantu Raya does not exchange favors for free, nor does it demand everything at once. Instead, it proposes a relationship, one it intends to dominate over time. Early terms seem tolerable: periodic offerings, maintenance of its shrine, and observance of its presence. But those agreements are merely introduction. Season after season, the spirit requests more, greater offerings, more secrecy, deeper obedience. If the summoner hesitates, misfortune begins to rise: illness, nightmares, failing luck. These manifestations are not revenge, but reminders, proof that a pact with the great king is a chain with no slack. Once the link is forged, separation becomes nearly impossible. Traditional accounts insist that the binding is acknowledged not just by one spirit, but by witnesses from other realms. Some reports speak of flickering shapes joining the edge of the summoning circle, lesser Hantu arriving to bear witness, their low murmurs vibrating through the foliage. The great king's acceptance is marked by transformation. The central flame turns blue, or the night sound rushes back in a single violent surge. In that instant, the Hantu Raya and the human become bound by mutual recognition. To seal the pact, a token is exchanged, often intangible, a fragment of the practitioner's aura traded for the great king's protection. The bomoh's body remains mortal, but their shadow no longer truly belongs to them. Beyond the pact itself, maintenance becomes a lifelong commitment. The summoner must perform periodic offerings, keeping the spirit nourished and appeased. Failure results not in immediate death, but spiritual erosion. Dreams filled with the sound of waves crashing in sealed rooms. Waking visions of unseen figures waiting at the edge of mirrors. These symptoms mark the loss of favor, and practitioners must atone quickly through renewal rites lest their own vitality be consumed. In many stories, the Hantu Raya grants its followers immense power at first. Successes multiply, wealth accumulates, and enemies falter. But such prosperity always carries a scent of rot. The greater the gifts, the stronger the leash grows. It is said that each successful summoning leaves a scar upon the earth. Places where the great king has been called refuse to heal properly. Grass grows pale, animals avoid the sight, and storms gather above it with unnatural regularity. Locals refer to these as tanapanas, the hot grounds, and avoid them for generations. Even the most experienced bomoh will not perform a second rite in the same location, believing the residue attracts uncontrolled entities once the Hantu Raya departs. Thus, the physical landscape of Malaysia is peppered with invisible scars, silent evidence of past negotiations gone right or wrong. In this way, the history of summoning becomes geography itself, mapped not in ink, but in memory and fear. Some modern interpretations attempt to rationalize the ritual as psychology or performance, a symbolic act representing human ambition confronting its own shadow. Yet to those who still practice or believe, symbolism is an insufficient explanation. The great king responds, they insist, because it is real, and the evidence lies in transformations that defy coincidence. A man with nothing becomes prosperous overnight. A woman previously ignored finds herself feared and obeyed. Villagers whisper, as they always have, about those who gain too much too quickly, and about the nights when strange lights pulse in the jungle, while strange silhouettes linger beyond the trees. The world of spirits, it seems, is never entirely dormant. Each summoning ends with dismissal, though only the wise succeed in closing the gate cleanly. The practitioner must reverse the chant, retrace the circle, and extinguish each flame while speaking gratitude without subservience. The great king departs when it chooses, not when commanded. If the summoner lingers too long or falters in composure, the entity may take this as permission to remain. Such failures often lead to hauntings, where the spirit's voice never truly fades, echoing for years like the pulse of a promise that cannot be undone. Thus, every bomoh who dares attempt the ritual knows the unwritten warning: summon only once, bind only if desperate, and never believe that power can be borrowed without eventual repayment. Once the summoning is complete and the great king has accepted its mortal partner, the true ordeal begins. The ritual of binding may mark the initiation, but the covenant's sustenance defines its longevity. The Hantu Raya, like all primordial forces, cannot exist in the material world without nourishment. Yet its hunger transcends mortal understanding, for it feeds not on flesh or fire, but on devotion, attention, and life force. Those who believe they have secured the great king's loyalty soon learn that what they've truly gained is responsibility, a relentless demand that grows with every fulfilled desire. The first stage of this dependency feels deceptively benign. The Hantu Raya's requirements appear manageable, simple gestures of maintenance rather than sacrifice. The practitioner might begin by offering daily portions of rice, water mixed with fragrant oils, or perfumed smoke from burning benzoin. These acts seem harmless, even reverential, creating an illusion of mastery and control. Yet each offering opens a channel, a thread of energy linking the summoner's vitality to the spirit's essence. With every act of devotion, that link strengthens, binding practitioner and entity with cords invisible but unbreakable. Over time, the demands escalate. What begins as a symbolic exchange becomes a compulsion. The Hantu Raya communicates through dreams or sudden intrusions of thought, whispering what offerings it prefers, when it must be fed, and what consequences follow neglect. The requests expand into items that carry emotional or spiritual significance. A lock of hair, a drop of blood, the personal garments of a loved one worn during sleep. None of these are taken by force, but the intent behind them grows darker, transforming rituals of respect into acts of possession. The summoner convinces themselves that obedience ensures stability, unaware that compliance is the very mechanism through which control erodes. Legends describe the process of corruption as slow and nearly imperceptible. Victims continue their daily lives while changes accumulate in the shadows. The once devoted practitioner begins to withdraw from human company, their attention consumed by unseen obligations. Livelihoods prosper inexplicably. Businesses flourish, crops thrive, rivals fall ill or lose their footing in sudden misfortune. Neighbors watch and whisper, noting the glow of wealth accompanied by a deepening pallor in the summoner's face. They eat less, sleep rarely, and when they speak, their words carry curious weight, as if someone else listens through their voice. Gratitude becomes ritual, obligation masquerading as faith. Among villagers, tales circulate of warning signs that mark a person bound too deeply to their great king. Dogs bark at empty corners whenever the individual enters. A faint humming follows them at dusk, audible only to children and the dying. Their shadows elongate unnaturally in firelight, blurring at the edges as though uncertain where the human ends and something else begins. During festivals, they avoid communal prayer, finding excuses to withdraw. When questioned, they dismiss it as tiredness or piety. In truth, they are avoiding what their spirit companion cannot tolerate: the sound of collective sanctity, the resonance of human faith untainted by bargain. Feeding the insatiable extends beyond physical offerings. The Hantu Raya feeds most efficiently on emotion. The practitioner's triumph, anxiety, jealousy, and rage produce the energy it craves. The more dramatic the emotional life, the stronger the nourishment. This invisible consumption becomes reciprocal. The great king amplifies the practitioner's passions to ensure a steady supply. Arguments escalate, desires intensify, and victories arrive at the cost of mounting exhaustion. The relationship resembles addiction in perfect metaphor. The spirit supplying what sustains its worshipper while ensuring dependence deepens beyond redemption. Traditional healers warn that the Hantu Raya's hunger can never be completely appeased, because its appetite evolves with its master's success. The more wealth or prestige a person gains through its power, the more substantial the entity's demands become. Prosperity functions as bait. Each triumph reinforces the illusion that the offerings work. The summoner convinces themselves that their growing empire is divine blessing rather than parasitic design. When setbacks finally occur, when illness strikes or fortunes falter, it is already too late. By then, the great king has entwined its essence with every aspect of their existence, and separation would feel like amputating the soul itself. In the moral framework of village life, this dynamic serves as an allegory. Prosperity obtained through unnatural means carries invisible obligations that erode the human spirit. To feed the Hantu Raya is to maintain constant dialogue with temptation. It teaches dependence, reinforcing that success cannot exist without sacrifice. In broader cultural context, scholars have long interpreted these myths as warnings against the dangers of unchecked ambition. Yet among those who live closest to the land and the spirits governing it, such interpretations seem naive. To them, the Great King's hunger is literal, and ignoring it invites ruin. Failure to fulfill the Hantu Raya's needs manifests consequences that defy natural law. Crops once lush with color wither overnight. Machines malfunction in unison, though no mechanical fault can be found. Children awaken screaming, describing faces hovering near their windows. Animals flee from the compound, even loyal dogs refusing to return. The summoner experiences waking dreams, fleeting glimpses of movement just beyond sight, whispers echoing their own voice out of sync, reflections that delay before matching their gestures. These signs culminate in physical ailments: weight loss, blackened nails, fevers that spike and fade in impossible patterns. Medical aid proves futile, for the sickness roots not in the body, but in the imbalance between promise and payment. When the Hantu Raya grows impatient, it does not strike in rage. Instead, it starves the practitioner of its protection. Fortune reverses with clinical precision. Allies turn hostile. Wealth evaporates, and accidents occur with clockwork frequency. Each misfortune echoes the magnitude of missed offerings. The spirit's punishment mirrors debt collection, meticulously calculated to remind the summoner of the agreement that sustains their existence. Yet even in desperation, few choose to sever the bond entirely. Fear of retaliation outweighs hope for freedom. In some villages, elders recount stories of those who tried to flee and were found days later wandering aimlessly, their memories erased, murmuring prayers to something no one else could see. Perhaps the cruelest aspect of the feeding cycle is its inheritance. When a pack-bearer dies without formal dismissal, the spirit does not vanish. Instead, it transfers allegiance to the next of kin, usually the eldest child, who inherits not wealth, but the obligation to continue feeding. Some families mistake early prosperity as blessing without realizing its origin. Only after peculiar dreams and unexplained visitations do patterns emerge. In these stories, a family haunted by generational prosperity begins losing members prematurely, each successor living shorter than the last. The elders, when confronted, admit in whispers that the ancestor who founded their fortune made a pact long forgotten, but eternally binding. To manage this inherited curse, descendants may attempt to renegotiate the terms. They bring offerings to ancestral altars, performing renewal rites guided by remaining bomoh who still remember the formulae. These ceremonies aim to convert the relationship into one of ancestral guardianship rather than servitude, reframing the Hantu Raya as protector of bloodline instead of consumer of souls. Success varies. Some claim the curse transforms into blessing, while others report catastrophic backlash, storms destroying properties, livestock dying without wounds, and dreams filled with eyes watching from beneath water. It seems that the Great King seldom accepts demotion with grace. There are accounts of practitioners attempting to outwit the Hantu Raya by creating an effigy to absorb its hunger. A puppet crafted from animal hide and infused with elements of the summoner's likeness. In theory, the spirit feeds on this vessel rather than its human master. For a time, these methods appear to work, delaying decay and prolonging success. But every substitution carries risk. The effigy must be maintained meticulously, its existence kept secret. Neglect or discovery shatters the illusion, and when the spirit realizes the deception, retribution follows with quiet ferocity. No screaming, no spectacle, only absence. The practitioner vanishes without trace, leaving behind hollowed offerings, still waiting on altars that never again attract insects or decay. Symbolically, the feeding ritual reflects the universal truth that power requires constant maintenance. The universe abhors stasis. Energy borrowed must eventually be repaid. The Hantu Raya personifies this law in its most merciless form. It gives abundance to illuminate the hidden costs of desire, then devours those unprepared to sustain what they summoned. The summoner's mistake lies not in making offerings, but in believing those offerings end with physical acts. Every choice, emotion, and act of will becomes another form of tribute, and the longer the relationship endures, the more complete the surrender becomes. In nighttime conversations within the villages, elders teach that the best way to appease the great king is never to call upon it at all. True prosperity, they remind the young, flows from harmony with the world rather than domination of it. Yet the temptation persists, generation after generation, whispered to those who find their lives bound by misfortune or longing. There will always be someone willing to risk feeding the insatiable, for in the promise of the Hantu Raya lies a tragic reflection of humanity itself, the endless hunger for more, even when more is the very force that ensures our undoing. The promise of the Hantu Raya has always been one of irresistible allure. To those who live under the crushing weight of scarcity, the Great King appears not as a monster, but as salvation itself, wealth, protection, and vengeance, all within reach of a single pact. The practitioner believes they are defying fate, bending the universe to their will, succeeding where others only pray. Yet beneath that surface of sudden prosperity lies the beginning of spiritual ruin, a corruption subtle and invisible until it has already taken root. For most who make the pact, the benefits arrive swiftly. The harvest that once failed begins to flourish. Business ventures succeed beyond expectation, bringing wealth even in times of general hardship. Foes are struck by inexplicable misfortune, accidents, illnesses, or financial collapse that seem too precise to be coincidence. The practitioner interprets these events as marks of divine favor, convincing themselves that their arrangement is justified. The great king fulfills every promise, wrapping its chosen in success and admiration, while concealing the hooks embedded deep within those blessings. The first sign of danger often hides within the triumph. Prosperity isolates as effectively as poverty. The practitioner's fortune breeds distance. Friends become suspicious, relatives envious, and neighbors fearful. Some whisper that such wealth cannot be clean, that unseen forces lurk behind every advantage. Superstitions, they call them. Yet even skeptics cannot deny the pattern. The rich grow uneasy, sleepless, haunted by dreams in which their own reflection speaks with another's voice. The once faithful now trust no one, for deep within they sense that the price of their advancement has already begun accruing interest. Protection is the second great temptation of the Hantu Raya. Those bound to the great king walk through life unharmed, their enemies falling away like leaves before a storm. Sharp objects dull when raised against them. Misfortune swerves, accidents miss by inches, and disaster crumbles into coincidence. In the eyes of onlookers, these individuals appear blessed, even chosen. Yet true believers understand that this invulnerability has limits. It shields only the body, never the conscience. With each narrow escape, a piece of their humanity erodes, replaced by a cold certainty that nothing, not even morality, can touch them. The great king's protection extends beyond self-preservation. It manifests as influence. Employers favor them unconsciously. Rivals stumble inexplicably, and situations twist to their convenience. In politics and business, this supernatural favoritism translates into dominance. Entire communities may fall under the shadow of one person's pact. unknowingly orbiting the presence of their bound spirit. What seems like charisma or leadership is in fact a projection of the Hantu Raya's will, its essence amplifying the practitioner's presence. People feel compelled to obey, not understanding that their submission serves a power far older than human hierarchy. Revenge constitutes the third and most intoxicating boon. Those wronged find in the Great King a weapon that guarantees justice, or what they mistake for it. To call upon the spirit for retribution is to reverse the order of fate. Enemies are stricken by misfortune, precisely tailored to their crimes, often falling into ruin without physical confrontation. A stolen inheritance returns through inexplicable luck. Insults find poetic retribution in the form of public disgrace. Ordinary people tremble before this unseen hand, their terror feeding the very entity that administers vengeance. Yet each act of justice leaves the practitioner further diminished, for in wielding vengeance, they become an extension of the same cruelty they suffered. These benefits are so tangible, so seductive, that one might mistake the Hantu Raya for a god of benevolence. For a time, worshippers even build shrines, disguising their service as religious devotion. Offerings multiply, and rituals flow seamlessly into daily life. The practitioner becomes both priest and devotee, celebrating miracles that appear to affirm righteousness. Villagers begin to seek counsel from the fortunate one, believing their words to carry spiritual authority. What they do not realize is that every spoken blessing, every charm of protection, carries the echo of the Great King's presence, spreading its influence further like ripples from a stone cast into still water. The paradox of the Hantu Raya lies in its delivery of genuine results through mechanisms of enslavement. It grants precisely what is asked, yet every fulfilled desire reinforces the bond-linking spirit and master. The more the practitioner depends on these powers, the more they forfeit autonomy. Decisions no longer arise from personal conviction, but from subtle impressions whispered into thought by the unseen patron. Dreams dictate action, and success becomes addictive. Like a gambler winning endlessly at a cursed table, the summoner cannot walk away. They begin to believe they are chosen, that control has become easy, unaware they are already the controlled. Communities witnessing these transformations describe them with fear and fascination. A once humble neighbor becomes arrogant, secretive, and distant. Their homes grow larger, their clothing more opulent, their tone commanding even with childhood friends. At night, lights burn behind their windows far longer than reason allows. Whispers claim unseen guests walk the halls, their footsteps hushed but rhythmic, as if circling the bed of the sleeping master. In public, everything appears serene, yet the villagers sense something hollow in their smiles, an echo of the Great King humming underneath the surface of humanity. For outsiders, the connection between success and curse might seem coincidental. But among those steeped in Malaysian folk belief, patterns never lie. There is always balance. Too much prosperity must draw its counterweight. The Hantu Raya's bargains teach this lesson brutally. Every fortune bought through spirit aid demands repayment equal to the intensity of desire that summoned it. The practitioner who sought protection from injustice becomes the originator of new wrongdoing. The one who sought wealth finds their family splintered, loyalty bought and sold like their first bargain. The spirit does not punish arbitrarily. It educates, teaching mortals the futility of seeking control over forces that reflect their own vices. Stories persist of those who tried to abandon the Hantu Raya after achieving everything they wanted. They attempt confession, repentance, even pilgrimage, but freedom eludes them. Their newfound prosperity dissipates overnight, and their health deteriorates in tandem. Some die subtly, heart failure, drowning, mysterious accidents involving mirrors or water basins. Others linger for years, haunted by dreams in which the great king stands silently at their bedside, neither threatening nor benevolent, merely waiting for acknowledgement. Until the final breath, the pact remains intact. The spirit collects debts with perfect patience. For time too, it is meaningless. There are rare accounts of practitioners attempting to twist the dynamic, offering the great king vengeance against its own kind, or promising to share influence through double pacts. Such arrogance rarely ends well. Spirits that perceive deceit respond in kind, either devouring their summoner from within or infecting them with insatiable craving for greater miracles. The body decays as if burned from the inside, while the victim, still conscious, smiles through agony, whispering praise for the being they now cannot exist without. These stories serve as moral parables as much as supernatural warnings, emblematic of ambition consuming itself. For all its darkness, the Hantu Raya's relationship with humanity reveals a terrible form of fairness. It does not trick those who seek it. It merely fulfills the unspoken desires that dwell at the core of human. Those longing for wealth learn greed. Those seeking safety learn dependence. Those lusting for revenge learn the emptiness of victory. Each receives precisely what they truly asked for, not the illusions they spoke aloud. The spirit only holds up the mirror. It is the reflection that terrifies. Despite countless warnings, new summoners continue to emerge. Poverty, jealousy, or desperation outweigh inherited fear. The tales of destruction are always balanced by stories of success. The neighbor prospering, the businessman untouchable, the family mysteriously rising from nothing. Human memory is short, and ambition eternal. The same desperation that called the first bomoh into the jungle centuries ago now moves through modern minds, scrolling through digital screens, seeking shortcuts through ritual learned online. The darkness has merely changed its disguise. Ultimately, the Hantu Raya does not symbolize wickedness, but consequence. It demonstrates that gifts from the unseen world are never donations, but transactions. The double edge of fortune gleams because one side cuts outward and the other inward. Every triumph demands blood, though not always visible to the eye. To some, this knowledge is deterrent. To others, invitation. And as long as human desire remains insatiable, the great king will continue to answer those who call, granting wealth, granting vengeance, and collecting, in equal measure, the souls of those too eager to believe they can prosper without paying the price that balance demands. Translate. Every pact with the Hantu Raya begins with confidence. The practitioner believes they have found balance, mastering ritual and willpower well enough to hold dominion over a spirit forged of ancient chaos. For a while, the illusion endures. They prosper, command respect, and walk through life feeling chosen. Yet power, drawn from the unseen, does not submit indefinitely. What begins as mastery eventually decays into servitude, and the descent is always slow enough that those falling rarely realize how far they have sunk until the darkness closes entirely around them. The first sign is subtle, fatigue that no rest can heal, and the eerie sensation of being observed in solitude. Practitioners complain of whispers behind them while working, or the sound of faint breathing reverberating through empty halls. Odd misplacements occur, objects moved overnight, offerings tampered with, doors unlatched despite careful sealing. These are the stirrings of imbalance, moments when the line between summoner and spirit begins to blur. The great king grows restless when its vessel weakens. It demands acknowledgement, asserting presence through disruptions that erode the illusion of control. Achtam. Translate: nightmares follow. The summoner dreams of their own home transformed into vast, shifting corridors, filled with smoke and distant chanting. Faces of loved ones distort into fluid expressions of unknown figures. In these dreams, mirrors become gateways, reflecting not the sleeper, but the crouched silhouette of something watching patiently from beneath the glass. When such visions start to bleed into waking life, the practitioner's loved ones notice first. Their eyes linger too long in silence, their hands tremble before dawn prayers, and their laughter fades as though it now belongs to someone else. What they cannot articulate is that the Hantu Raya, ever hungry, has started to dwell not beside them, but within. In traditional belief, possession is not abrupt, but gradual, a process resembling erosion more than invasion. The Great King does not seize the body violently. It whispers, reshapes thought, and adjusts emotion. A missed offering here, a broken rule there, and the boundaries begin to unravel. The spirit, empowered by neglect or overindulgence, no longer waits for summons. It begins to act through the host, manipulating speech or action to better serve its own continuity. Friends recognize the change too late, when the practitioner's moods swing from euphoric authority to violent dread, blaming unseen forces for mistakes that no longer belong solely to them. Warn. Translate: within the law, this stage is called the cross shadow, the point where the human soul and the spirit's essence overlap so completely that each mirrors the other's flaws. The summoner's greed amplifies the spirit's appetite. The spirit's malice fuels the summoner's isolation. To outside observers, what unfolds seems like mental deterioration, talking to invisible companions, wandering aimlessly in sacred spaces, laughing at sermons. Yet the possessed experience it as revelation. They feel omniscient clarity, as if the Great King feeds them insights far beyond their capacity, moments of understanding that fracture quickly into delusion. Power, once clear, becomes noise. Fear transforms into obsession. Practitioners attempt to appease their spirit through escalating acts of submission. More offerings, larger rituals, and secret ceremonies only worsen the dependency. The Great King feeds on attention. The more energy directed toward control, the stronger its grip grows. Some accounts describe voices insisting upon acts of destruction, tearing sacred texts, defiling household shrines, or withdrawing entirely from the community. Isolation is both symptom and weapon. Once cut off from collective faith, the practitioner loses the only safeguard capable of balancing their pact: human empathy. In solitude, the Great King becomes not guest or partner, but jailer. Translate: as the degeneration deepens, physical changes sometimes manifest. Neighbors speak of eyes that glint with an unnatural sheen under lamplight, or skin that appears too pale even in tropical humidity. The afflicted complain of hearing echoes of their own heartbeat in distant corners, or glimpsing their shadow moving independently. These symptoms mark the moment of convergence. The Hantu Raya no longer external, but animating flesh as host. By this stage, attempts at exorcism or ritual cleansing become dangerous. The entity anchors itself through fear, forcing any interference to strengthen rather than weaken its hold. Many accounts agree that the Great King rarely destroys its hosts outright. Death wastes useful vessels. Instead, it hollows them, transforming human consciousness into a quiet spectator trapped within its own body. Those who survive sometimes describe hearing their own voice, speaking unfamiliar words, or watching their limbs move without intention. To outsiders, these episodes mimic madness, leading to exile or confinement. Yet within the framework of Malaysian belief, such fates signify the pinnacle of the Hantu Raya's triumph. A body perfectly intact. A soul quietly entombed beneath obedience. Translate. More rural stories extend this horror beyond individual possession, turning it into a familial contagion. When the original summoner weakens, the spirit seeks continuity through lineage. It imprints upon descendants, appearing in dreams as a dead ancestor requesting acknowledgement. Children start exhibiting the same symptoms: night terrors, spontaneous trances, and uncanny bursts of insight beyond their years. Families go to pawang and bomoh for help, who perform detection rituals to determine whether the spirit's emblem still lingers. If they find traces of the Great King's mark, exorcism becomes both a spiritual battle and an act of inheritance. To succeed costs vitality. To fail passes the burden further down the bloodline. The tragedy lies in how preventable these descents seem in hindsight. Practitioners ignore warnings out of pride, convinced that discipline can outlast temptation. They confuse the Great King's compliance for respect, forgetting its allegiance lies solely with balance disrupted. Once the pact skews towards servitude, no human will or ritual precision can restore equality. The spirit does not rebel. It merely reclaims what was always its due. In this context, possession is less punishment than correction, the restoration of order in a relationship built upon delusion. The practitioner sought to govern a thing born of chaos, and chaos inevitably reasserts dominion. Translate. Among village elders, the warning tales always end with the same pattern: disappearance. The possessed either vanish into the jungle, drawn by voices promising peace, or wander into rivers as if summoned back to the invisible realm from which the power originated. Those recovered are found drowned, often in calm waters too shallow to explain the outcome. Others survive but return changed, carrying an aura that silences birds and quickens the heartbeat of anyone who stands near. They speak rarely, and when they do, their breath carries a strange chill, as though exhaled from a place far colder than the human world. The scholars of modern folklore interpret these stories as manifestations of psychological decay, reflections of guilt projected onto supernatural frameworks. Yet such reduction misses the essence of the narrative's warning. The Hantu Raya represents not mental illness, but moral disintegration, the slow collapse of boundaries between want and worth. The moment control slips, the practitioner loses not reason but purpose, ceasing to differentiate between personal ambition and the will of an ancient power feeding upon it. Madness, in these stories, is only the human word for surrender. Translate. In rare cases, salvation is recorded, but never deliverance without scar. The few who reclaim autonomy describe the process as rebirth through suffering, weeks of anguish as the spirit peels away from their essence, burning through temples, charms, and prayers that barely hold. They emerge with lifetimes shortened, voices hoarse from relentless recitation, yet memory intact enough to serve as caution. These survivors dedicate their years to cleansing rituals for others, their bodies frail, but their presence revered. Villagers approach them with offerings, not out of veneration for holiness, but for proximity to what once possessed the Great King's touch and lived to speak of it. Ultimately, every story of descent into darkness asks the same question. What happens when humanity confuses control with understanding? The summoner who believes power can be mastered without cost creates their own downfall. The Hantu Raya merely magnifies what was already within: the hunger to rule, the need to surpass, the refusal to yield. When control slips, the darkness that rises is not wholly other. It is reflection, magnified until the self disappears beneath it. And once the reflection begins to stare back, there is no summoner, no servant, no great king, only the endless echo of ambition consuming itself in silence. In the modern world, where cities glitter with neon light and smartphones illuminate faces even in darkness, it is easy to believe that the age of spirits has ended. Yet venture beyond the high-rises and highways into the heart of rural Malaysia, and you will find another reality, one where the old ways persist quietly alongside modernity. Here, belief in the Hantu Raya endures not as dusty folklore, but as a living truth, whispered through generations. The television may have replaced the fire pit, but the fear remains the same. That power gained too quickly carries a shadow no wealth can hide. In small villages nestled among rice fields and rubber plantations, stories of sudden fortune continue to circulate. Locals speak of neighbours whose fortunes reversed overnight. Farmers who could barely sustain their crops now driving new cars. Shop owners whose profits doubled without explanation. And families who rise from poverty within a single planting season. These transformations always invite curiosity, and curiosity invites speculation. Inevitably, someone mutters the same phrase, a pact with the Hantu Raya. The words carry no malice, only resignation, as if repeating an ancestral law that fortune and darkness are bound partners, forever inseparable. During interviews conducted in quiet homes and community halls, elders recount the same patterns. The chosen individual withdraws from communal activities, grows secretive, and becomes oddly sensitive to religious music or sacred gatherings. One village headman described visiting a neighbour whose house, though immaculate, felt unnaturally still. The air hung heavy, and no animals lingered near the entrance. Despite the hospitality shown, an instinctive unease settled over him. Later that week, villagers awoke to find the man gone, his livestock wandering untended, his fields lush and untouched. Only a shallow pit near the forest edge suggested a final offering too private to witness. Not all cases end in disappearance. Some beneficiaries of the Great King thrive for decades, enjoying prosperity matched only by rumours surrounding them. They donate generously to local mosques, host community feasts, and maintain an impeccable facade of morality. Yet beneath that generosity lies persistent discomfort, a faint sense that they live forever under negotiation. Villagers whisper that such individuals age differently. Their movements remain strong despite advancing years. Their energy unflagging even in heat that exhausts others. But when illness finally strikes, it does so like a hammer. They collapse without warning, their final words jumbled between prayers and the invocation of a name no one repeats aloud. Remote regions in Kelantan, Perak, and Kedah continue to serve as focal points for these testimonies. In such places, tradition permeates every aspect of existence, and the unseen world remains integrated into daily practice. It is not uncommon for families to maintain protective charms, known as azimat, the legacy of ancestors believed to have bargained wisely with the unseen. These objects, small bags sewn with Quranic verses, roots, or herbs, hang from ceilings or rest buried beneath thresholds. They represent the thin line between control and protection, between collaboration and curse. The people who rely on them do not see themselves as superstitious, but as participants in an ongoing coexistence that has outlasted time itself. One man from a fishing village along Malaysia's east coast told of a boat that always returned full, regardless of season or tide. The owner, a quiet man named Rahim, lived well, but kept no apprentices and never shared his methods. After his death, his boat was sold, but every new owner met tragedy, storms, sickness, or inexplicable loss of will to live. Eventually, the villagers pushed the vessel into the sea and set it ablaze. Amid the smoke, witnesses claim to see a shape rising briefly from the flame, humanoid yet indistinct, sinking beneath the waves with what sounded like laughter. Since then, no one has fished those waters at night. Elsewhere, in the highlands near old mining towns, families tell of inherited pacts passed down through bloodlines. The descendants of one prosperous dynasty confess that each generation requires a ritual cleansing on the anniversary of their founder's death. Failure to do so invites dreams of a towering figure knocking upon their gates, its voice polite, yet insistent. Those who ignored the dreams were said to wake with deep bruises across their chests, as though someone had pressed a hand there and whispered, "Remember your obligations." To these families, the Hantu Raya is less cursed than hereditary contract, binding prosperity to perpetual vigilance. Even in the midst of progress, rural belief in supernatural pacts remains far from rare. The availability of modern entertainment and education has done little to erase centuries of fear embedded in collective consciousness. Instead, the myth adapts, forging new expressions that mirror the anxieties of the present age. Local newspapers occasionally carry reports of business people seeking bomoh counsel, or of unexplained hauntings tied to sudden affluence. Villagers claim to discover hidden shrines beneath modern buildings, small altars with leftover offerings, candles still faintly warm. The world changes, but ritual endures, hidden beneath the surface of modernization, like roots clinging to old earth. Some modern believers see the Hantu Raya as an ethical metaphor for modern ambition. In conversations with younger Malaysians living between rural heritage and digital modernity, many compare the Great King's bargain to the relentless chase for wealth and status, dominating urban life. The idea that success carries invisible debt resonates across boundaries of faith and culture. As one young teacher remarked, "Every generation thinks it's free of the old spirits, but the same hunger drives us. We just change the language." This perception transforms folklore into philosophy, showing how myth evolves from cautionary superstition into enduring psychological truth. Yet in villages untouched by analytical distance, the fear remains utterly literal. Witnesses describe nocturnal lights drifting through palm groves, hovering low like lanterns, guided by unseen hands. Dogs refuse to chase them, and humans who attempt pursuit report heart palpitations or sudden headaches. In old cemeteries, footprints appear leading toward tombs, but never away. The most respected pawang explain these manifestations as remnants of energy leaking from poorly maintained pacts, echoes of entities left unfed, wandering in confusion between worlds. Their presence, they warn, is not just haunting. It is hunger searching for continuity. For some, however, the Hantu Raya offers comfort rather than terror. In agricultural communities dependent on volatile weather and unstable economies, the idea of an accessible source of strength provides hope. When the harvest depends on forces no human can control, collaboration with the unseen becomes less about greed and more about survival. Elders speak of righteous summoners who feed their spirit without excess, maintaining balance through humility and respect. They insist these practitioners die peacefully, their spirits merging harmoniously with the Great King rather than being consumed. Whether truth or wishful legend, such stories restore moral symmetry to a mythology otherwise dominated by ruin. Anthropologists observing rural ceremonies often note how easily these traditions coexist with modern religious practices. Within a single household, one might find both prayer mats and protective talismans, both the call to prayer and the whisper of older incantations. This coexistence illustrates the uniquely Malaysian worldview, a synthesis rather than a contradiction. To villagers, invoking the Hantu Raya does not reject faith, but complements it, acknowledging that divine and elemental powers coexist in the same universe. The Great King is not evil in their eyes, merely dangerous, like fire, beneficial when contained, disastrous when ignored. Perhaps the most revealing testimony comes from those who witnessed the aftermath of failed control. A healer from the outskirts of Pahang described treating a family that brought him ashes in a white cloth. Their patriarch had died during the fasting month, yet his body would not cool, remaining warm even after burial. Fearful, they exhumed him and discovered the soil vibrating softly beneath his coffin. The pawang instructed them to burn his possessions and recite prayers for 7 nights. On the final evening, a black wind swept through the house, extinguishing every lamp before dawn. The family awoke unharmed, but swore they felt something enormous departing, a presence that had finally claimed what was long promised. As dusk settles over these villages and voices of the living fade into the hum of insects, the boundary between accepted religion and inherited law dissolves once more. To an outsider, these accounts may sound like fragments of rural imagination, but to those who live among them, they are social memory made real. Every tree, every hut at the edge of the jungle holds a story that binds the present to an unseen past. The Hantu Raya endures, not because it hides from disbelief, but because disbelief itself is irrelevant. For those who have seen the fruits of forbidden fortune, or smelled the faint aroma of offerings long since abandoned, myth and reality remain indistinguishable. The Great King still listens, still watches, waiting for the next voice bold enough, or desperate enough to call. Among the thousands of stories whispered across Malaysian villages, some share a single question. How can one know when they stand in the presence of the Hantu Raya? Recognition, the elders insist, is the first line of defense. The Great King does not announce its arrival with thunder or flame. It moves quietly, testing boundaries before claiming dominion. Yet those attuned to the unseen world understand that certain anomalies, physical, spiritual, or emotional, betray its proximity. These signs, when interpreted correctly, can mean the difference between surviving encounter and succumbing to possession. The most reliable warning lies in the atmosphere itself. The presence of the Hantu Raya reshapes the environment before manifesting visibly. Dogs howl without pattern, roosters crow at midnight, and birds abandon trees in flurries of confusion. Air grows oppressively dense, carrying neither heat nor cold, but something that feels like absence itself. Locals say it is the sensation of being stared at by something immense, patient, and distinctly sentient. Humans instinctively slow their breathing in such moments, as if their instincts remember the ancient predator their reason denies. Another mark of intrusion manifests through mirrors and reflective surfaces. The Great King's essence distorts reflection, creating flickers that appear in periphery. A second shadow, or eyes where none should exist. Those unknowingly ensnared may catch glimpses of movement that vanish when directly observed. A shimmer that trails their reflection half a beat behind. In Malaysian belief, this displacement signals the encroachment of another consciousness, probing the boundary between observer and observed. A reflection that does not obey confirms one truth. Something else has begun to notice you. Within homes touched by its attention, ordinary objects behave irregularly. Candles refuse to burn evenly, metal rusts in days, and food spoils despite refrigeration. Offerings of incense collapse into ash too swiftly, while flowers left at altars rot overnight into black residue. These disturbances are not random. They represent the Great King's gradual testing of space. tasting the environment before claiming it. The pattern mirrors predation in observation, approach, and finally dominance. Those who recognize this rhythm can still act before the predator decides to stay. The human body itself can become an alarm. Practitioners who encounter the Hantu Raya feel pressure along their chest during sleep, what folklore calls the night weight, where a spectral force immobilizes and feeds upon spiritual energy. Cold sweat follows, accompanied by dreams of vast darkness filled with slow, deliberate footsteps. Upon waking, victims often find physical marks, bruises shaped like hands, or skin pale where blood once pulsed warmly. In modern terms, these may be dismissed as sleep paralysis. In the old way, they mean something far simpler. An invitation has been heard. There are subtler indicators still, ones that operate within emotion rather than matter. People within proximity of the Great King report sudden waves of melancholy, bursts of irrational anger, or overwhelming fatigue that strikes during otherwise normal activities. Relationships deteriorate without explanation, as envy and suspicion grow among family members. The Hantu Raya, being a manipulator of balance, thrives on discord. Where unity collapses, its influence strengthens. Thus, moral and social decay often precedes the physical signs, and emotional turbulence becomes both symptom and sustenance for the entity's growing hold. For those able to identify these warnings, protection requires knowledge equal to courage. The first and most timeless defense is purity of intention. No ritual, charm, or invocation succeeds when born of greed or ambition. The Great King recognizes hunger in all forms and moves toward it like smoke toward flame. The pawang teach that a steady mind and heart aligned with balance form the human equivalent of armor. In practical terms, this means humility, acknowledging the unseen's power without craving its use. The one who seeks control invites corruption. The one who observes without arrogance leaves no opening. Material protections supplement spiritual fortitude. Traditional apotropaic practices employ objects that repel or disrupt the Hantu Raya's essence. Iron tools placed near doorways create energetic interference. Salt scattered across thresholds neutralizes corrupt energy. And the burning of certain resins, such as benzoin or frankincense, cleanses spaces of lingering resonance. While many dismiss these as superstition, their ritual function serves both pragmatic and psychological purposes. They affirm human sovereignty over space, declaring through repeated action that this world, though shared, remains under mortal stewardship. Amulets known as tankal also play a crucial role. Crafted by spiritual specialists, these charms combine sacred verses with natural substances, root fragments, feathers, or earth drawn from 3 separate locations, symbolizing the triad of body, spirit, and world. When worn around the neck or wrist, they form a barrier not of distance, but of alignment, reinforcing the wearer's connection to the benevolent forces governing existence. Yet elders warn that the charm's power depends entirely upon the bearer's integrity. Should one use it for harm or deceit, protection reverses into conduit, attracting precisely the forces it was meant to repel. Communal practice remains the most potent safeguard. The Hantu Raya preys not upon individuals alone, but upon isolation itself. Collective prayer, shared rituals, and communal harmony form a fortress the spirit cannot easily breach. In rural areas, villagers still gather, during moments of collective fear, to recite verses aloud, their voices merging into a single resonance that vibrates through the jungle like living thunder. The sound, it is said, reminds spirits of their boundaries, restoring equilibrium to realms that too often blur. Togetherness, more than any charm or incantation, keeps the realm of mankind illuminated against encroaching dark. Psychological awareness also serves as protection in the modern era. Many bomoh now teach that understanding the symbolic of possession, viewing it as imbalance rather than punishment, reduces vulnerability. Fear feeds what knowledge disarms. To name an experience is to reclaim authority over it. For believers and skeptics alike, this principle bridges tradition and logic. To face the great king without panic diminishes its dominion. The Hantu Raya cannot feast on composure, nor can it deceive one who sees it clearly for what it is, a reflection of unchecked desire bound into form. But for those already marked, more drastic measures become necessary. Ritual cleansing, known as mandi limau, employs water infused with lime, flowers, and herbs to strip away residual energy left by the entity's touch. Participants immerse themselves fully, reciting affirmations that reject the spirit's claim. The discomfort, nausea, trembling, shivering is expected. It signals resistance leaving the body. For severe cases, spiritual masters conduct night ceremonies to sever bonds through reciprocal offerings, symbolically sending the great king back to its realm with payment adequate to end the contract. Such rites are perilous, often shortening the healer's own vitality, for in dealing directly with the Hantu Raya, one must always negotiate from within its attention. More extreme traditions advocate earth sealing, a last resort performed when possessions repeat through generations. Families dig a pit into which symbolic representations of the afflicted, clothing, hair, or written names are buried alongside offerings. Quranic verses or sacred mantras are recited as the pit is filled, sealing the ground to contain the entity's reach. If successful, symptoms cease, though the land itself becomes untouchable. Locals avoid farming or building upon such sites, claiming the soil hums faintly when disturbed, reminding all that balance achieved through spiritual warfare remains fragile. Across time, these protective measures evolve, yet retain one recurring truth. Prevention triumphs over cure. Once the great king's shadow falls upon a life, the struggle to reclaim independence requires strength few possess. Awareness, respect, and moderation are the armor of the wise. Those who laugh at superstition often play directly into its logic, mocking what they do not understand until they stand trembling before its reality. Every generation forgets and then relearns the same lesson. That belief, dismissed or not, carries consequence. Even in the 21st century, tales circulate of people ignoring these signs only to meet strange misfortunes. Businessmen lose empires overnight. Families fracture without visible cause. And once skeptical individuals seek the very rituals they once ridiculed. The persistence of such accounts underscores something vital: the human need to perceive order where reason fails. Whether one views the Hantu Raya as psychological spectre or genuine entity, the outcome remains identical: fear, imbalance, and the urgent need for restoration. Ultimately, recognition and protection are not about fearing darkness, but understanding the boundaries between worlds. The great king waits in the spaces created by human arrogance and despair, feeding not merely on offerings but on the blindness of those who believe the invisible no longer touches them. The cautious live by quiet respect, acknowledging unseen forces without bending knee. They light their lamps at dusk, speak softly in sacred places, and remember that power restrained is wisdom. For the Hantu Raya, like all forces of the unseen, respects balance above all things. Where reverence replaces greed and discernment tempers desire, even the Demon King turns away, seeking elsewhere those too willing to forget what protection truly means. Apriti. Translate. As the final echoes of this journey fade into silence, one truth remains immutable: Every tale of the Hantu Raya circles back to the same question. What is the true cost of power? From remote rice fields under the heavy breath of tropical haze to dim city apartments where ambition still burns sleeplessly, the lesson endures unchanged. Humanity has always sought control over the uncontrollable, and the Great King embodies the mirror that punishes as much as it reveals. Its pacts do not merely grant strength or wealth, they expose character, amplifying virtue or devouring vice with equal precision. The Hantu Raya does not corrupt. It clarifies, making monsters of those already half transformed by desire. In folklore, the entity stands not as villain, but as counterpart. It exists because humanity demanded it, because the need for shortcuts is as ancient as hunger. When rice harvests failed, when enemies triumphed unjustly, when hope dried under unending heat, people searched for power beyond prayer. The Great King answered, not from compassion, but necessity. In doing so, it became the embodiment of equilibrium, an equal and opposite force to human longing. Those who summoned it sought to alter fate. The Hantu Raya ensured that balance, though stretched, would never be broken without consequence. Translate. The myth of the Great King transcends geography and creed. Its equivalents appear across cultures, the pacts of Faustian scholars, the bargains with jinn, the contracts with crossroads spirits in the American South. Each represents the same universal dialogue between hunger and consequence. In Malaysia, however, the Hantu Raya's story breathes within living communities rather than yellowed manuscripts. It inhabits whispered caution, moral warning, and cultural self-reflection. Through it, the people articulate both fear and wisdom, a reminder that unseen forces thrive not merely in darkness, but in moments when desire outweighs restraint. To the believer, the Hantu Raya is terrifyingly real, an intelligence watching from the corners of night, waiting for anyone reckless enough to reach for more than they deserve. To the skeptic, it is metaphor, a folkloric mechanism for explaining social inequality or sudden fortune. Yet both interpretations share a single insight. Power without accountability breeds destruction. Whether one calls it spirit, symbol, or psychological construct, the teaching remains identical. Humanity's compulsion to dominate creation inevitably summons its own shadow, and that shadow demands payment in proportion to the trespass. Aching. Translate. In the rhythms of village life, the legend continues to serve as moral compass. The elderly pass it down to the young, not to instill fear, but to cultivate awareness. Every warning about offerings left unfinished or greed unrestrained hides a lesson on humility. Prosperity, they insist, must be gradual. It must carry the mark of labor and patience. The moment success becomes instantaneous, the old ones murmur the same refrain. Nothing appears from nothing. Behind that simple phrase stands the Great King's silhouette, unseen yet omnipresent, reminding listeners that shortcuts slice both ways. Modernity cannot erase the essence of that wisdom. Though the trappings of belief have changed, smartphones replacing charms, neon replacing firelight, the underlying anxiety persists. The world still rewards speed over integrity, triumph over compassion, spectacle over substance. Each era, in its own tongue, rediscovers the Demon King's bargain. For every invention that promises ease, humanity trades another measure of time, privacy, or serenity. The myth of the Hantu Raya thus evolves into moral commentary, speaking as loudly to skyscrapers as to thatched villages. It whispers through every ambition pursued without reflection. The quieter the conscience, the easier the invitation. Translate. In this sense, the Great King bridges two dimensions, folkloric and philosophical. As folklore, it teaches reverence for balance and the unseen laws governing existence. As philosophy, it warns of self-inflicted exile when desire eclipses empathy. The true horror it represents is not the supernatural, but the moral, that civilizations repeat the same ancient errors with new instruments, believing themselves immune to the patterns their ancestors already mapped in smoke and superstition. The Hantu Raya is, therefore, timeless, not because it endures as creature, but because it encapsulates the unchanging of human ambition. For those who still dwell in proximity to the spirit world, this understanding runs deep. They know that rituals do not end at the end of ceremonies, nor do warnings fade once the candles die. The unseen watches continuously, responding not to prayer alone, but to conduct. Each act of kindness strengthens barriers, while greed cracks them open. Many rural elders still whisper blessings before planting, before journeys, before new ventures, not because they fear haunting, but because remembrance itself is protection. To forget the unseen, they say, is to call it closer. Translate. Legends describe rare moments when the great king shows mercy. It may withdraw when a once ambitious soul embraces humility or chooses sacrifice over gain. These stories, however few, reveal another truth, that even within tales of terror resides grace. The Hantu Raya is relentless, but not arbitrary. It respects the ancient equilibrium it enforces. Those who repent not out of desperation, but understanding, sometimes find release, not through exorcism, but acknowledgement of limits. In the cosmology of Malay spirit lore, acceptance is the ultimate ward against chaos. What remains beyond one's control must not be conquered, but respected. At the cultural level, the legend of the Great King holds mirror to society itself. Communities that exploit others, or leaders who trade harmony for dominance, echo the individual who bargains with darkness for power. Systems built upon consumption and inequality are, in essence, pacts written on a civilizational scale. And like the summoner who forgets his promises, such societies awaken one day to find their reflection watching independently. Consequences materialized in crisis, in disillusionment, in quiet loss of meaning. Thus, the mythology transforms seamlessly into allegory, warning not only individuals but nations of imbalance invited by greed. Translate to scholars, this myth endures precisely because it satisfies dual hunger, fear of the unknown and recognition of the self. The folkloric Hantu Raya bridges two emotional extremes: the terror of losing control and the temptation of limitless potential. Within its spectral shape lies the blueprint of the human psyche, eternally torn between restraint and indulgence. To study it is to study humanity's recurring flirtation with disaster. And for the storytellers who repeat these tales across generations, the repetition is not redundancy, but ritual reinforcement, a way to remind each successive listener that knowledge without humility corrodes the soul the same way salt eats iron. Across centuries, the Hantu Raya remains both scapegoat and teacher. It punishes the reckless, yet rewards those who approach with reverence. Its bargains destroy the arrogant, yet elevate the wise. Through paradox, it reveals harmony, forcing mortals to confront lessons they would otherwise ignore. In every iteration of its legend, the final message resounds: beware the seduction of instant power. What is offered freely in the shadows will always cost something in the light. The longer the delay in payment, the heavier the debt becomes. Translate. And so, the tale closes where it began, in that liminal twilight between worlds, where human desperation meets the patience of the unseen. The Hantu Raya watches still, an ancient witness to humanity's cycles of forgetting. It does not hunt the living. It waits for invocation. Whether through ritual in a jungle clearing or metaphor in the corridors of ambition, the summoning continues. The only barrier is remembrance, the awareness that power outside balance inevitably turns predator. Those who listen honor both ancestors and themselves, for vigilance is the truest form of faith. If this journey has taught anything, it is that myth and morality are not separate. The Great King exists as a reminder that the supernatural begins wherever human limits end, and that every invisible law echoes a visible choice. Power and price are one equation, written in different alphabets across eras and continents. Some call it karma, others justice. Some whisper it through ghost stories, told beside rice fields while lightning prowls the horizon. All mean the same. The world, in its infinite memory, never forgets a bargain. It only waits for balance to be restored. Translate, and so, as the candles burn low and the tale of the Hantu Raya returns to silence, let one final truth carry forward. Our fascination with power is eternal, but so is consequence. To walk in balance between them is the oldest wisdom humanity has ever known. Those who honor that balance walk peacefully beneath night skies, untouched by whispers hungry for invitation. To all who have listened and traveled through this story, remember this when the dusk grows silent around you. The unseen hears reverence. And if you wish to continue exploring the forgotten corners of the world's myths, join us again in Echoes of the Old World, where ancient voices still speak across the ages, waiting for those who dare to listen.